Hello, welcome to my channel. So I thought now would be a good time to do a very quick whistle-stop tour through the history of the NHS. Some of its history anyway, from its creation right up until the present day. Obviously there isn't enough time to cover everything, but we'll have a go. So let's start off in 1948, which was quite a significant year. The Second World War had only just ended. Winston Churchill was still Prime Minister and the NHS was born. Now the idea of the NHS has been around since before the war. In fact, Aneurin Bevan, the politician responsible for setting it up, had been talking about it since the 1930s. But setting up a national health service was one thing, staffing it was quite another. And that's where the West Indies came in. At this point, many of the hospitals in Britain were still struggling to cope with the backlog of patients resulting from the war. They simply didn't have enough staff. So the Ministries of Health and Labour, working alongside the Colonial Office, the General Nursing Council and the Royal College of Nursing, launched a massive recruitment drive throughout the West Indies. By the end of 1949, over 2,000 nurses had been recruited, and the following year that figure had risen to almost 1/8. This was more than enough to help ease the pressure on hospitals across Britain. But it also marked the beginning of an enduring relationship between the NHS and the Caribbean. In 1953, the structure of DNA was discovered by two scientists at Cambridge University, James Watson and Francis Crick. It was a discovery that would change the world and save countless lives. As the years went by, more and more groundbreaking discoveries were made, and new treatments and operations were developed. In 1956, the polio immunization program began. That same year, Frank Parsons, a physician at Leeds General Infirmary, he performed the first kidney dialysis in Britain. This marked the opening of the first artificial kidney unit in the country and gave hope to thousands of people suffering from kidney disease. 2 years later, the polio and diphtheria vaccination programs ensured that everyone under the age of 15 was vaccinated against these potentially deadly diseases. And in 1960, the first kidney transplant took place at Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. The transplant was performed by a team led by a surgeon named David Watterer. And, incredibly, the donor and the recipient were identical twins. This was a remarkable achievement, and it paved the way for thousands of transplants that were carried out in the years that followed. That same year, the first implantable heart pacemaker was also used. Again, this was a remarkable achievement, and it gave hope to millions of people suffering from heart conditions. In 1962, the first full hip replacement was carried out at Wrightington Hospital by a surgeon named Sir John Ch. This was another groundbreaking achievement that changed the lives of countless people suffering from hip disease. In 1968, the measles vaccine was introduced to the UK. Up until this point, measles had been one of the leading causes of infant deaths. But thanks to the vaccine, this all began to change. That same year, South African-born surgeon Donald Ross carried out the first heart transplant at the National Heart Hospital in London. Sadly, the patient only survived for 3 weeks. But the operation paved the way for future breakthroughs. And speaking of breakthroughs, in 1968, Europe's first liver transplant was performed at Addenbrooke S. Hospital in Cambridge by a surgical team led by Professor Roy Callan. The recipient, a 57-year-old woman, had cirrhosis of the liver, and she was only given a 10% chance of survival. But against the odds, she made a full recovery. Now, throughout the 1970s, the NHS continued to grow and develop. New hospitals were built, new technologies were introduced, and new treatments were developed. But perhaps the most significant development during this decade was the introduction of CT scans in 1972. Scans, or computed tomography scans, revolutionized the way doctors examined the body. Unlike traditional X-rays, which only provide a two-dimensional image, CT scans allow three-dimensional images to be produced from a large series of two-dimensional X. This makes them an invaluable tool for diagnosing a wide range of conditions. In the early 1980s, the NHS faced a number of challenges, including an aging population, rising levels of obesity, and a growing demand for healthcare services. Despite these challenges, the NHS continued to innovate and develop new ways of treating patients. For example, in 1987, the first lung-only transplant in Europe was carried out at the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle. The operation was performed by a team led by a surgeon named Professor Sir Anthony Newman-Taylor, and amazingly, the patient survived without the need for a lung transplant for 6 years. That same year, the world's first heart, lung and liver transplant was also carried out at Papworth Hospital in Cambridge. The operation was performed by a team led by a surgeon named Professor Sir Roy Callan. Unfortunately, the patient only survived for 21 days. But again, the operation paved the way for future breakthroughs. In 1987, Britain's first ever purpose-built AIDS ward was opened at the Middlesex Hospital by none other than Princess Diana. At the time, AIDS was a highly stigmatized and feared disease, but Princess Diana's visit helped to raise awareness and understanding of the condition. As the 1990s dawned, the NHS faced a new set of challenges, including the need to embrace new technologies and the growing problem of antimicrobial resistance. Despite these challenges, the NHS continued to innovate and develop new ways of treating patients. One example of this was the introduction of MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging scans, in 1980. MRI scans are a type of imaging technique that uses a magnetic field and radio waves to produce detailed images of the body. They have largely replaced CT scans in many areas of medicine, as they provide a clearer and more detailed image. In the early 2000s, the NHS introduced a number of initiatives to improve patient care and access to healthcare services. One of the most significant of these was the introduction of NHS walk-in centres in 2000. These centres offer easy access to a range of healthcare services, including treatment for minor injuries and illnesses, health checks and advice on a range of health issues. In 2007, the first living donor in the UK was at St James Hospital in Leeds, when a man, 20, donated part of his liver to his father, 50, who had advanced liver disease. This was a landmark moment for the NHS, as it marked the first time that a living donor had given part of their liver to a loved one. In 2010, the UK's first cochlear implant operation was carried out to provide hearing in both ears. Cochlear implants are devices that can help people with severe hearing loss to hear sound and speech more clearly. Now, let's move on to the 2020s. As you're probably aware, in 2020, the world was hit by a pandemic caused by a novel coronavirus. On the 31st of January 2020, the first known case of COVID-19 was reported in the UK, and the NHS quickly sprang into action. Within weeks, the first person in the world to receive a COVID-19 jab outside of a clinical trial was a 92-year-old grandmother called Margaret Keenan from Coventry. She was given the Pfizer vaccine on December 2020. In recent times, the NHS has faced a multitude of challenges, not least of which has been the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. However, the health service has shown incredible resilience and has continued to provide high-quality care to patients throughout. One of the most significant developments during this time has been the commitment to become carbon net zero by 2040. This is a bold target that will require major changes across the organization, but it is an essential step towards creating a sustainable future for the NHS and ensuring that it is around for generations to come. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this whistle-stop tour through the history of the NHS. If you did, please do give the video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any ideas for future videos, please do let me know. Thank you once again for watching, and I very much hope to see you soon.